And first, let me express my gratitude to Bob for his visionary leadership of the Fetzer Institute, which is playing such an important role in the promotion of spiritual values and inserting the very word love back into discourse in the academy and particularly in science. And I love that you use the word love. And Vivek Murthy, if those of you heard him yesterday, our former Surgeon General, also talked about this epic conflict between love and fear, and how this festival is really so much an invitation for us to embrace love. And it's just wonderful to be among such supporters and activists who are helping to promote these values. So I'm going to today give you a little glimpse of what we have been spending quite a bit of time and energy on over the last number of years, and it really is captured in the title of this presentation. Everything else is a footnote, and the title is Well-Being as a Skill. And most people don't think of well-being as a skill, but hopefully all of you will appreciate this invitation to reconceptualize well-being as a skill. I am a neuroscientist by training. I began my career with one simple question, and that is, why is it that some people are more vulnerable to life's slings and arrows and others more resilient? And how can we nurture this quality and promote more human flourishing to promote more resilience? And in the early part of my career, I focused a lot on the adversity side, studying the neural basis of how we respond to stress and anxiety. And then in 1992, I met this gentleman who is here. He is visiting. In this photograph is a picture that was taken in 2001. He was visiting our lab at the University of Wisconsin. This is His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He actually has visited Madison, not to brag about this, but he's visited Madison 16 times. We are so blessed that it really is quite extraordinary. And he has been such an inspiration. And when I first met him in 1992, he challenged me and he said, look, you've been using tools of modern science to study anxiety and fear and depression and stress. Why can't you use those same tools to study kindness and compassion? And that was a wake-up call. And then a few years later, another meeting, he was more explicit, and he said, I want you to take the practices from our tradition, turn them into a form which can be enjoyed by everyone, a more secular form, not losing the spiritual quality. Investigate them with tools of modern science, and if you find them to be valuable, disseminate them widely. And this is my assignment for the remainder of my life. And this is what we've been doing. And so I'd like to share with you a little bit about this journey. And one of the most important things that I want to say at the beginning is that this work that we and other scientists are doing could not have been done were it not for a number of critical developments in modern science that provide the basis and the framework and the foundation for all of this work. And I'd like to give you a glimpse of what that is. And I'd like to talk about 4 themes. The first is neuroplasticity. I'm sure many of you have heard this word before. Neuroplasticity happens wittingly or unwittingly. Our brains are constantly being shaped by experience. Our brains are being shaped by forces around us about which we often have little control, and also frequently, if not most of the time, are unaware of. And the invitation in all of this work is that we can all take more responsibility for our own brains. And one of the amazing discoveries that scientists have made is that by nurturing virtuous qualities of mind, we actually can promote positive changes in the brain. So this is something that can't be overestimated as really important. When human beings evolved on this planet, we did not all begin brushing our teeth. Yet, I know that every one of you sitting here brushes your teeth, probably a few times a day. This is a kind of personal physical hygiene. If we took our minds as seriously as we take our teeth, and if we nurtured our minds, even for these few minutes a day in an intentional way, I have the strong conviction that this world would be a different place. And so I would like you all to be part of this journey and to make a commitment to spend as much time, at least, nurturing your mind as you do brushing your teeth. And really, the data show that even a few minutes a day can make a difference. Now, it turns out that this plasticity is not only present in our brain, it is also present in our genes. The field of epigenetics is the science of how genes are regulated. And we know that we're all born with a fixed complement of base pairs, which is our DNA, and for the most part, that will not change over the course of your lifetime. But what will change is the extent to which a gene is turned on or turned off. You can think of genes having little volume controls, and that is very dynamically regulated. And it turns out that our demeanor actually can influence our gene expression, our epigenetics. The way a mother behaves toward her infant, the extent to which she expresses love and nurturance, can induce epigenetic changes in the infant which will persist for the entire life of the infant, influence its brain wiring and its behavior. And it turns out from modern new research over the last few years, those changes can be passed down at least a couple of generations. And this is not fringe science. This stuff is published in the very best scientific journals in the world. And this is very powerful and suggests that our quality of mind, the embodiment of virtue, is something that is cellular and will impact all of these different levels of our mind and our body. The third theme is related to this, and that is our increased understanding of the bidirectional communication between the mind and brain and the body. Our minds are embodied. And it turns out that when we nurture positive qualities of our mind, it doesn't only influence our psychological well-being. It actually influences our biology below the neck in ways which are consequential for health. Large epidemiological studies show that individuals who report higher levels of well-being are physically healthier. It does not mean that this is true of everyone. There will, of course, be exceptions, but if you look at tens of thousands of people, this is what you see. And so it leads to the conjecture that promoting well-being will actually change our systemic biology, which will influence our physical health. And so one of the implications of this is cultivating well-being will lead to decreased healthcare utilization and decreased healthcare costs. And if we can actually show that, every organization on the planet will want to incorporate this into what they are doing. And so this is actually something that Mayor Gregg and I were talking about as an opportunity to explore here in Louisville with a number of different sectors that I think will be receptive to this. The fourth theme is something I mentioned this morning for those who were in the practice that we did together. And of all the four themes I'm going to talk about, this is probably the most controversial. But I think also it is one that is very powerful and has extraordinarily important implications, and that is that every human being comes into the world with innate basic goodness. Now, since this is the most controversial, let me just give you one little data point of how scientists explore this. And I'm going to show you two very short video clips that were shown to 6-month-old babies. So let me show you these video clips. Okay, that's one. Which of these do you think a 6-month-old baby prefers? How do you know that? How can we ask a 6-month-old baby which it prefers? One way is we can look at the extent to which the baby smiles. And it turns out that babies smile much more to the first clip than compared to the second clip. Also, scientists can monitor the eye movements of these babies, can look using infrared eye tracking precisely at where and for how long a baby is looking. And it turns out that more than 90% of infants prefer to look at the first video compared to the second video. They show more gaze fixation toward the first compared to the second. Now, this is part of a large corpus of literature that is growing that all points in the same direction. And it suggests that qualities like kindness and altruism are there from the start. But we think of kindness in a way that is similar to the way scientists think of language. We're all born with a propensity for language. But in order for that propensity to be expressed, it needs to be nurtured. We need to be raised in a normal linguistic community, and it may well be the same for kindness, that we all come into the world with these seeds of kindness. And the reason why this is particularly important is we do practices to nurture these qualities, and when we do that, we're not creating these qualities de novo, out of nowhere, but rather we are nurturing a basic characteristic of our mind that all human beings share. So, from this background and this foundation, we have formulated a framework for understanding well-being that is deeply informed by both the contemplative traditions and by modern science. And this is a framework that holds that well-being is comprised of 4 major constituents, and each of these constituents or components shows plasticity. We can actually cultivate these qualities. So in the remainder of the few minutes I have, I'm going to quickly go through each of these 4 qualities and say a little bit about them. But before I do that, let me just say that there is an urgent need. This is not a luxury, but I think that the data is pointing us in the direction of saying that this is a necessity. There's a lot of data we can show, but let me just give you a couple of tidbits. This is the percentage of youth in the United States between the ages of 12 and 17 who experienced a major depression in the past year, and the data go from 2004 to 2015. And you can see on the left there are different age groups, and you can see among kids 16 to 17, more than 15% of the population is experiencing this is a diagnosable major depression. And you can also see in the figure on the right the gender difference. These differences are profoundly different in boys and girls, with girls suffering from at the rate of about twice what boys suffer. And that gender difference emerges right around adolescence and persists that way for the remainder of life. and these differences are present in every Western country in which this has been investigated. If you look at suicides in adolescence, what we see is that this graph is going, unfortunately, in the wrong direction. So this is the bad news. But when Martin Luther King gave his famous speech in the 60s, the title of that speech was not "I Have a Nightmare." So we can have a vision, a dream of what is possible. And so I'm going to skip that and just underscore that well-being is an urgent public health need. And the 4 components of well-being are these. The first component we call awareness. And it includes mindfulness. It includes self-awareness. Meta-awareness is the quality of knowing what our mind is doing, which may sound strange, but how many of us have had the experience of reading a book where you are actually reading each word on a page, and then you turn to another page and maybe a third page, and after that you realize you have absolutely no idea what you've just read. Your mind is somewhere else. Well, it turns out in a famous study that was done a few years ago, querying people with texts on a smartphone, people were asked 3 questions. One is, what are you doing right now? Checking off from a list of activities. The second question is, where is your mind right now? And the third question was, right at this moment, how happy or unhappy are you? It turns out that 47% of the time, the average American adult is not paying attention to what she or he is doing. 47% of the time. And folks, I have the strong conviction that we could do better. Excuse me. And imagine a world where we can show up and be more fully present. So awareness is a critical ingredient in that. And when people were asked how happy or unhappy are you, when they were distracted, they were significantly less happy. The title of this scientific paper was "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind." The second component of well-being is connection. This refers to the qualities that promote successful social relationships. Qualities like kindness, empathy, having a positive outlook. And again, these are qualities that can be cultivated. In research that we've recently done with teachers, where we've trained them in these qualities, we found that measures of implicit bias, which are the driving force of the achievement gap in the United States today, can be significantly reduced. So this is of great practical import. The third component we call insight, and it really is insight into ourselves, into how this narrative that we all carry around about ourselves, how it works. When we become really fixed on this narrative, when it becomes rigid, we become less resilient. At the very extreme, there are people who have a narrative that is filled with negative self-beliefs, and they actually believe the narrative. And that is a prescription for depression. And so part of well-being is cultivating a healthy relationship to this narrative. Finally, the last component of well-being is purpose. Having a clear direction, a true north toward which our life is directed. And most importantly, appreciating how everyday tasks, including stuff like taking out the garbage or doing your laundry, is actually related to your sense of purpose. And it turns out that among people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, sense of purpose is the single most important psychological predictor of longevity. So it actually has real biological significance. So these are 4 components of well-being that each can be nurtured. We know a little bit about how to do that. Different people may require different kinds of strategies, and this is a major area of future scientific research. But this all leads us to the inevitable conclusion that well-being can actually be cultivated. I want to end now with a quote from a book that was on the bestseller list for some time that was written by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And he said, the systematic training of the mind, the cultivation of happiness, the genuine inner transformation by deliberately selecting and focusing on positive mental states and challenging negative mental states is possible because of the very structure and function of the brain. But the wiring in our brains is not static, not irrevocably fixed. Our brains are also adaptable. Thank you very much.
Richie, thank you very much for a deeply scientifically grounded and very hopeful vision. I'm going to invite Lisa, if you have any reflections that came up for you while Richie was talking.
It's a beautiful talk. Thank you. Fantastic talk. So if we were to go home this evening and do two things, what might they be?
I would say that one of the important things is to reflect on, with a sense of appreciation, on people that have done things that are helpful to us. We spend so little time intentionally appreciating what others do to help us in our life tasks. And appreciation, I think, is an emotion which is insufficiently appreciated. And so I think that that can be really, really helpful. And a second is to recognize that calming our minds and opening our hearts is not just good for us, but really can be beneficial to all of those around us. And so we can do very simple practices to help ground us and make us calmer by bringing our awareness into our bodies and into the present moment. It's something that just requires a little bit of practice.
So you underscored the urgency of this task. So let's reverse engineer. If we have a decade or 2 decades to really infuse this understanding into our culture, where are the most important places to start?
I think the leverage, it's a great question, and thank you for asking it, Bob. I think the leverage points, in my view, are, one is the business community, actually. I have found, I've been an academic my whole life. I must tell you that I found more receptivity in the corporate world to this than I found among colleagues in the academy.
That's extraordinary.
I think that to some extent they are appreciating the importance of collaboration and teamwork. This is something so critical in modern corporate settings. They also are burdened with healthcare costs, and that's a sort of financial issue. So I think the workplace in that sector is one really important sector. Another really important sector is healthcare directly. There is more and more appreciation of this. The American Heart Association came out with a consensus statement that was published in the major cardiac journal Circulation, which is the journal of their association. I believe it was 2018, a consensus statement on the utility of contemplative practice as an adjunct treatment for cardiovascular disease. So it's beginning to happen. And I would say the third major area is education, and there's here in Louisville with the Compassionate School project that is so central to this city and is a wonderful example of how these kinds of practices can be infused in an education system at a large scale.